Welcome, flat earthers and globe earthers alike. This is a response to Brian Leake's latest video, Breakthroughs from Outside the Box. In that video, I saw something quite worth commenting on, and so here we are. Now, in his video, Mr. Leake actually uses a video called the Mandelbrot Set, the only video you need to see. And despite there may be a bit clickbaity sounding title, that video I found certainly quite interesting. The video goes into Benoit Mandelbrot, fractals, and what the Mandelbrot set is. And despite knowing already quite a lot about that subject, I found that video extremely well made and very much worth the watch. I didn't watch it in full yet myself, but I will do that as soon as I'm finished here. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, maybe you want to do the same as well, so I will link the video in the description below. And of course, I will also link Mr. Leake's original video in order to be fair. Now here of course the relevant part from the Mandelbrot video is the same part that Mr. Leake also uses in his video. So I will read that here, and this is of course describing Mandelbrot's position within the IBM. IBM was looking for creative thinkers, nonconformists, even rebels, people like Benoit Mandelbrot. And here is what Mr. Leake has to say about that, and he continues in his own video. That's what I tell them at Jose J.G. Gonzalez's channel, where I go to debate, and they try to tell me everything is settled science. And I try to tell them that's not where discoveries come from. Breakthroughs always come and always will come from outside the box, and free thinkers, nonconformists. Of course, Mr. Leake's implication here is quite clear. He seems to implicate that flat earthers are the current day Benoit Mandelbrots, the people coming into science from the left field and from outside the box, and the people that we need to listen to in order to move our science forwards. Of course, you might already know that I might have a small problem with that comparison, but Mr. Leake is correct on one thing. Yes, scientific revolution indeed does often come from nonconformists like Benoit Mandelbrot, and technological innovation also comes through similar rebels. If we want to take a second example, we might go to the father of tectonic plate theory, a guy called Mr. Alfred Wegener. Mr. Wegener was not a geologist. Wegener was actually a meteorologist, and his idea for the tectonic plates was they are moved around by convection currents deep underground. Of course, that idea links back to his previous field of meteorology. In meteorology, of course, convection currents are a very central concept. Now, from history, we know what happened to Mr. Wegener is somewhat sad in the sense that his ideas were not accepted as fast as they should have been. They were rejected partly also due to him not being a geologist. So his status as an outsider in the field probably led to his ideas not being accepted in the beginning. However, we know that nowadays he is known as the father of the tectonic plate theory, and his ideas did indeed get accepted in the end. Now here we come to Mr. Leake's comparison and whether it is actually apt. Here is the question. Are flat earthers the modern day Benoit Mandelbrots? Are flat earthers the modern day Wegeners? And I would venture no, but I will give some reasons as to why not. Firstly, there's an important distinction between Mr. Mandelbrot and Wegener and the current day flat earthers. The current day flat earthers are not scientists, and Benoit Mandelbrot and Mr. Wegener were. Now, I do not mean to implicate that we do not need to listen to a person's idea if the person is not a scientist. That is not my argument here. Philosophically speaking, and on a principle, if someone's idea is logical, if it's valid, if it's backed up by data, we need to listen to it without looking into what the background of the person is. But here is why the scientific background of people like Mr. Mandelbrot and Wegner comes into play and why it is important. Being a scientist, being educated in a field of science, firstly gives you the ability to think like a scientist. And that's not something anyone actually gets born with. You need to learn to think like a scientist, and you need training to do that. It's comparable to boxing. No one gets born a brilliant boxer. Well, actually, the comparison might actually be a bit faulty because someone might get born to be a brilliant boxer, but no one thinks like a scientist from the get-go. So you need to learn to think like a scientist. Secondly, if you study a field of science, that gives you already some ideas and concepts from a scientific field. And then when you go into a new field of study, like Mr. Wegner did with geology, where he moved to from meteorology, he used concepts and notions from meteorology to his new field of geology. And that way, he was able to utilize his scientific understanding. So indeed, it is important in these cases to make a distinction. Many of these revolutionaries are scientists. Guys like Wegner, Mandelbrot, and Einstein. They were already scientists in their own fields. And sometimes they jumped into a different field, but they were still trained as scientists and they used scientific concepts that they had wasted a lot of time learning. So we can say that in that sense, the modern day flat earthers are not Mr. Mandelbrot or Wegner. They haven't been trained in the sciences. Now, of course, sometimes it does happen that someone from completely left field with practically no scientific education whatsoever comes into a scientific field and establishes themselves as a name. And we can here go to a case of Mr. Ramanujan. Mr. Ramanujan was an Indian mathematician, or he became an Indian mathematician. Ramanujan came from a very poor background, no scientific education to speak of, and no formal mathematical training whatsoever. He wrote his mathematical ideas on scraps of paper, and then he sent these scraps of paper to different universities around the world. Now, most of these universities, as they received his scraps of paper, threw them to the trash bin. They didn't know what they were looking at. Partly because I think Ramanujan used concepts and mathematical. He wasn't formally trained, so he used concepts in a different way than most people did. But secondly, and this is actually interesting, his ideas were so far ahead of their time that the mathematicians looking at his ideas in the universities didn't know what they were looking at. Now, Mr. Hardy happened to actually realize that maybe there is something here. Maybe this Ramanujan is actually the real deal. So he invited Ramanujan to England and then later became friends with Ramanujan and took him under his wing and became his tutor. And of course, from history books, we know that Mr. Ramanujan was actually one of the most brilliant mathematicians that ever has lived, and ironically enough, a much greater mathematician than Hardy, his mentor. So, the question that we might ask now here, relating to flat Earth, is Are flat earthers the modern Ramanujans? Are they people who come from completely left field with relatively little or no scientific training whatsoever, but who still have managed to understand something that science has so far missed? I hold that highly unlikely still, and here is why. Here's what actually will happen if you will pose a new idea into any field of science. That idea will get subjected to criticism and scrutiny. And here's actually what has happened already. That has already happened to Flat Earth during the past 5 years, and it seems that the Flat Earth idea does not stand to scrutiny. And this is an important thing to emphasize here. Just because your idea is out of the box, and just because you come out of the left field with no training whatsoever, that doesn't mean that your idea will not get criticized and scrutinized. In fact, in order for science to stay valid, your idea has to be criticized. Every idea has to be criticized. If we do not do that, science cannot function. It will stop working if we accept ideas in just because they are new ideas. So your idea being new and from the left field, from outside the box, doesn't mean it will not get scrutinized. It will get scrutinized, and it has to be scrutinized in order for science to stay valid. And that's, of course, the important distinction between the flat earth theory and science. Science stands scrutiny, and flat earth, at least as I understand it, doesn't. Now, Mr. Leake, while he didn't necessarily say this, came close to something that might even be called a fallacy. This kind of emphasis of the out of the box can almost form a bias. If you assume that your idea has to be accepted and it has to be true just because it is outside the box, it can form a bias. And that's very dangerous. We cannot in science be biased towards accepting new ideas just because they are new. They have to be scrutinized in the same accuracy and in the same detail as the old ideas were. And there is a good reason why that is. Whenever I bump into this idea that we need to accept this flat earth because it's outside the box and therefore it has to be true, I like to use this saying. There is also a lot of cat poo outside the box. And here is what I mean. Technically speaking, there is an infinite number of ideas that man can come up with. And most of those ideas, if you think about this at all, most of those ideas will be incorrect. For example, I can come up with an idea that magnetism is created by magical pixies dancing around that create magnets and then make magnetism work. Of course, that's a novel idea. It's from outside the box, and I might even consider myself a free thinker and a revolutionary. Does that mean that my idea has to be accepted because I'm a free thinker? No one has thought of this yet. Of course not. The idea that magnets are created by pixies has to be scrutinized in the exact same detail as every other idea is, no matter that it's new and no one has thought about it before. So, flat earthers, we cannot sadly give you a free pass into science just because your idea is new and just because you come from outside the establishment and just because your idea is out of the box. Every scientific idea has to be scrutinized. And this is actually a larger concept that can be also applied to different fields outside of science. In every field, one should combine free thinking and creativity with realism and scrutiny. Let's say you are creating a company and you're founding a company. You have a brilliant idea, and then you see a huge vision in your head. This is what I want to do. This is what kind of company I want to make. But then you have no one there to actually scrutinize your ideas and make them founded in reality. And your company will fail, of course. That, of course, exemplifies that even in fields like economy, we need to combine free thinking and creativity with realism and scrutiny. If you make a company and there's no realism behind it, it will fail. And that works, of course, in science. It works in arts, even in arts. When you create a painting, if you're a good artist, you don't just throw around your ideas willy-nilly. You actually use your critical part and you separate the wheat from the chaff, and you try to figure out which one of these millions of ideas is actually worth putting to the paper, and then you let your creativity flow again. It's kind of an interplay between creativity and then scrutiny. Both need to be present in order to make good science, in order to make good art, and in order to make good companies. So no, flat earthers, we cannot let you into science just because you think you are revolutionaries. We will scrutinize your ideas, and if they are found wanting, we will throw them to the trash bin. If, on the other hand, you are correct, your ideas will stand scrutiny, and you have no reason to complain about it. I have recorded this video for so many times. I recorded it once and then that got trashed because my mic wasn't on. So properly, this one here does the trick. I will try to create these kind of more rambly videos for a few weeks now because I'm busy with my university studies. I plan to start cutting down these and have less of a ramble, but currently I don't have the time to learn how to do video editing, so this is how it will be for at least a few weeks until my schedule clears up. In any case, this concludes this video. Have a good one, Mr. Leake, and have a good one, everyone else as well.